Let's take a look at Revelation chapter 12. As I mentioned before when I gave an overview of Revelation, Revelation is written in a style of Hebrew poetry called a chiastic arch. The centre point in any chiastic arch structure, the structure in which Revelation is written, is the most important point that the author, in this case John, is wanting to convey. Everything in the first half of the book leads towards it, and everything in the second half of the book leads from it. Let's just quickly review that slide I showed you previously. At the beginning and end A are the greeting and epilogue. The first B, you've got the 7 churches, and for the second B, you've got the New Jerusalem and Bride. Both of these B's are the church, and there's a progression that happens from the state of the 7 churches in the first B to the second B, where the bride of Christ surfaces after the marriage supper of the Lamb. The first C, you've got the 7 seals, and the second C is the destruction of Babylon. The first D is the 7 trumpets, an angel and 2 witnesses, and the second D is the 2 beasts, an angel and the 7 bowls. And in the middle E we find the woman, the dragon and the male child. The key point to note is that the central event in Revelation 12, where it talks about the woman, the dragon and the male child, is the most important piece, the centerpiece of the book of Revelation. It's the story of the incarnation. Everything in the first half of the book leads toward it, and everything in the second half of the book of Revelation leads from it. In Revelation 12, the woman is a picture of the remnant of Israel, the true followers of God, in other words, believing Israel, and she gives birth to a male child who will rule the nations with an iron scepter, that child of course being Jesus. The red dragon who is at war with the child and with Michael the archangel is the accuser of the brethren, or Satan. And when he is defeated from heaven, when he's defeated and cast out of heaven, he begins to fight against the woman's other children, these children being the early Christians. So in Revelation 12 we get the whole picture of the gospel and the story of the formation and the finalization of the new covenant. Let me just read you from Revelation chapter 12 verses 1 to 7. A great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet and a crown of 12 stars on her head. She was pregnant and cried out in pain as she was about to give birth. Then another sign appeared in heaven, an enormous red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 crowns on its heads. Its tail swept 1/3 of the stars out of the sky and flung them to the earth. The dragon stood in front of the woman who was about to give birth so that it might devour her child the moment he was born. She gave birth to a son, a male child, who will rule all the nations with an iron scepter, and her child was snatched up to God and to his throne. The woman fled into the wilderness to a place prepared for her by God, where she might be taken care of for 1,260 days. After the ascension, where the child Jesus was enthroned, the woman flees into the wilderness. This is representative of the Jewish believers who fled from Jerusalem just prior to its destruction. 1,260 days literally was the length of the Jewish wars and the Neronic persecution of the church. But we can see from the Old Testament that it became a symbol of any period of persecution. Revelation 12, 7-9 goes on to say, Then war broke out in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought back. But he was not strong enough, and they lost their place in heaven. The great dragon was hurled down, that ancient serpent called the devil or Satan, who leads the whole world astray. He was hurled to earth and his angels with him. The war that broke out in heaven does not follow on from the woman's flight into the wilderness, but rather sheds light on the previous verse and why the woman had to flee into the wilderness. The dragon, it tells us, has 7 heads and 10 horns, possibly meaning that he's a culmination of all 4 of Daniel's beasts in Daniel 7. The beasts of Daniel represented 4 empires, which many believe were all stages in the dragon's attempt to establish his rule over the world. Verse 9 talks about the dragon being cast out, which lines up with the death and resurrection of Jesus. We know this because in John chapter 12, verse 31, Jesus is talking about his death, and he tells us, "Now is the judgment of this world. Now the ruler of this world will be cast out." Also, verse 10 lines up with the atonement too. "Now salvation and strength and the kingdom of our God and the power of his Christ has come." The wings of an eagle that carry the woman to safety reminds us of God telling Israel that he carried them out of Egypt on eagle's wings. Steve Gregg, the author of Revelation4 Views, which is a parallel commentary on the book of Revelation, that's well worth reading if you want to understand all 4 interpretive views on Revelation, because it contains extensive coverage of how the church has viewed Revelation over the centuries. Steve Gregg notes that the death of Christ did not put Satan entirely out of business, but that it ended his career as the accuser of the brethren. The blood of Christ has undermined the grounds of every charge that Satan might bring against the brethren, he writes, something that's well worth meditating on. The blood of Christ has undermined the grounds of every charge that Satan might bring against the brethren. Revelation chapter 12 is the central message of the book of Revelation. Everything previously led to it, and everything following leads on from it. As I mentioned previously in my overview to Revelation 1-11 speaks of the bridegroom of Jesus and finishes with visions of the Son of Man clothed in glory. Revelations 12 through to 22 speak of the church, the bride, and finishes with visions of the church clothed in glory. People, the greatest battle of all has already been fought and won by Jesus. Let me finish with this quote from David Chilton. "The victory over the dragon, according to John, does not take place by means of a cataclysmic event at the end of history, but by means of the cataclysmic event that took place in the middle of history, the sacrifice of the Lamb." Wow, such good news.